Hey there, and welcome to Finlos Lives. Thanks for joining me. Today we're going to be taking a little bit of a nostalgia trip all the way back to 1995. We're going to look at the movie Hackers. And just thinking about that, 1995, I was in the 8th grade. I remember standing outside and talking about the film with some friends back in Homestead Middle School in Homestead, Florida, 1995. Very distinctly remember talking about how cool some parts were, how silly other parts were, but regardless, just some really, really great memories with this film. And it was directed by Ian Softly, an English director. He would go on to direct another, I think, really great movie, K-Pax, which has a sort of similar color palette, we'll say. But anyways, focusing on Hackers. So this movie was coming out just as the internet was becoming something that people knew about. It was really America Online that was the dominant force of the early consumer internet. And the movie Hackers gave us an alternate look, actually something of an insider look to what the internet could be. And to that point, the internet was whatever the service provider showed to you, whether that be, I don't know, what are you thinking, CompuServe, or like I said, AOL, America Online, or some other curated internet experience. And it mostly consisted of things like email or basic web service. Even websites were still kind of just coming into their own at this point. Most people who really knew what the internet was, they were still using text-based services like bulletin boards or BBSs, which were largely peer-to-peer or very small mainframe networks. And even that was very, very niche. But in that time, the hacker subculture was really thriving. And the movie Hackers, silly, yes, and inaccurate in a lot of ways. Really interestingly, especially watching it now, and knowing what I do just based upon personal experience, and especially the experiences that I got to sort of vicariously experience that my siblings were having. It actually captures the spirit of that culture really in its heyday. I grew up, as I'm alluding to, adjacent to the hacker culture and other intersecting subcultures. My dad was an electrician and ran a technology repair business, which granted us access to many of a lot of these early tech tools that you'll see in films like Hackers and other technology-centered movies and stories of that time. So that includes things like personal computers cobbled together from spare parts, wireless phones, media players of all varieties, and really the tools necessary to tinker, because tinkering is really a central aspect to hacking. Because more than anything else, hacking is about curiosity and finding out how things work and figuring out how to crack things open while they still work, so you can see how they work and look backstage behind the curtains for how things are put together, how the ropes and the pulleys moving the props on stage, sort of to extend that metaphor, what each of those little ropes does, what each piece and part moves and how it moves. And for most of us, these tools like computers and TVs and smartphones, the internet, they may as well just be magic for all we know of how they really do what they do. And I think that that's still true. And hacking, I think, is very much getting a deeper understanding of how these tools work. So enter Hackers, a movie which tries to combine the esoteric mysteries of everyday technologies with lots of product placement, interestingly, for early Apple PowerBook laptops and high energy techno music, weird fashion for sure, nicotine and caffeine, video games, young and beautiful antisocial characters, and rollerblades. Because can't forget those rollerblades, and just mashes them all up into a hot mess. And man, is it a hot mess. But it's also close enough to being true to all of these intersecting cultures to actually resonate. And why it resonates, why any story resonates, is because the characters are relatable and because the conflicts that are present are relatable. And in that sense, the film really does a good job. The characters are age appropriately obnoxious and silly, but still really endearing and very easy to get behind. And the conflict, and this, as I most recently watched it, I've been watching it in segments as I lay in bed getting the kids to sleep. So interesting sort of juxtaposition for where I was then versus where I am now. But as I've been watching this in stages, the conflict behind the main characters actually really stands out as being pretty powerful with some real stakes. You know, it's not just about the Tinker Toys and the technology, which are essential tools in the story, but the conflict present is appropriate to the age of the characters, but also really relevant. It's about questions of loyalty to family and friends, and making really hard decisions about who is best served when we have to make decisions to do something, when we're thinking of the rightness and wrongness of our actions, which group or individual is better served by our actions. And that's a really complex thing to consider, because in the context of the film, there's the rightness and the wrongness of what they're doing in general, that the hacking activities, the breaking into computer systems and figuring out how to access private information and all that sort of thing. There's that meta question, the big level question of what is the rightness or wrongness of hacking. But then beyond that, once we get into the nuts and bolts, really it's a simpler question of who is harmed, and when harm has to be done, where is the least harm done? And that's really interesting. And I think the writer and the director of the film, so the writer being Raphael Moreau and the director Ian Softly, really handled that sort of question really, really well, I think. There's a scene in the movie where the main character, Dade Murphy, played by Johnny Lee Miller, has to decide to hand over an essential piece of information to the story's antagonist, the villain, or his mom will go to jail. Okay, simple enough proposition, right? Of course, we're going to do whatever we can to help the mother. But then the secondary consequence of that is that he is betraying the group of friends who have taken him in and sort of shown him the ropes, not just of the hacker culture in the new town where he lives, but shown him the ropes of the city where he now lives in New York City, which is obviously a very complex place to live. And so it's sort of complicated. And there's this actually very beautifully staged scene where he is calling from a payphone, so that he's sort of doing this out in the city in private. It's nighttime, and he has to wait for the antagonist, the guy called the Plague, to come. The names are ridiculous. But the Plague, who at one point gets referred to Mr. the Plague, the Plague has to come pick up this floppy disk from him. But it's a beautifully staged moment where Dade is basically just pacing, waiting, and we get to experience that sense of like, now that I have to wait, I actually have to think about what I've just done, and knowing that I can't do anything about what I've just done. It's a really, really thought-provoking moment. And so, like, when you have movies like this that sort of take these abstract concepts. Okay, we're going to have these kids hacking, right? What are we going to show them? Sitting at their computers for the entire movie? Because there is plenty of that. There are these moments where they're just pecking away at keyboards and trying to figure things out. It's not very interesting to see on screen. So you have to sort of fill that in with these visual elements of Mandelbrot's looking like worms, because I guess they're supposed to be computer worms, like programs. And there's like really high level mathematical problems that are floating through space to indicate that the characters are thinking really hard about these technological problems. And then there's these like camera flyovers of computer processors that are intentionally made to look like the buildings of New York City, which is very interesting. Like, it's all very thoughtfully done. It makes absolutely no sense, but it's really thoughtfully done in such a way to visualize these elements, because it's a movie, which is a visual medium, so you have to be able to show what's going on in some sort of way. The sense is not there, but the artistic intent is there. And I think that the filmmakers did a really good job of capturing that. I'm willing, and I think many people are willing to sort of forego the reality of what is going on, because nobody wants to see them just staring at a monitor. So I think that those are some interesting artistic licenses that make sense. Again, all of that is meaningless if we don't care about the characters, and I think we do. I think that the writers and the filmmakers did a good job of creating characters who are, if not believable, definitely sympathetic and definitely relatable. I really am rooting for them throughout the film. And the other things that really helped this movie be successful, I think, were the timing of when it was released. Because if it had come out a few years earlier, I don't think that many people would have really known what it was talking about. Again, because this is sort of at the cusp of really the idea of the internet, and people understanding what the internet could be was really coming to the forefront of everyday information. But also, Hackers comes out in 1995, and you've got this young, fresh cast who are kind of unknown, but who are, and again, just a year or two later, going to be huge names. You've got Johnny Lee Miller, who just a year later would become sort of a sensation with his supporting role in Trainspotting. Matthew Lillard, who a year later would become a common household name because of Scream, and then just a couple years later as the voice of and the actor playing Shaggy in the Scooby-Doo movies and cartoons. And of course, Angelina Jolie, who is ubiquitous now, but at this point, she's really just an up-and-coming young actor who in a year or two would be known for films like Foxfire or Pushing 10, or a year or two after that, Girl Interrupted and Lara Croft Tomb Raider. Like, these are huge films that this movie sort of kind of set the stage for these young actors. And then you've got some other actors who are, I mean, I don't know if we'll call them household names, but these are some fairly big names, at least for me. Lorraine Bracco, who in 1990 starred in Goodfellas, and one of my favorite character actors of all time, but just a fantastic actor in general, Fisher Stevens, who I knew from 80s movies, especially Short Circuit, which came out in 1986, and then Super Mario Brothers in 1993. So it's just got a great, colorful cast. And beyond the cast, I think the movie actually serves as a field test and progenitor of cyberpunk movies, especially The Matrix. It doesn't have the same sci-fi trappings. It doesn't have the action. It doesn't even have the budget of what that movie would be, and that was released just a couple of years later in 1999. But there are so many parallels in theme and style that I really never thought about it until I just watched it. Like, I don't know if, well, I'm not going to say that because who knows what would have happened, but I think in a lot of ways, Hackers sort of paved the way for what The Matrix would be. I mean, the clothing is there, the music is there, and then this idea, this fear of, but then an embracing of technology, and especially the internet as it was becoming more part of our daily lives. I think there was the start of this cultural subconscious desire to explore the potential and the dangers of this new and powerful means of information exchange and communication. And I think ultimately the lasting power of hackers as a piece of media worthy of exploration is its portrayal of hacking as a lifestyle. Most people think of hacking as these lone wolf nerds who are crashing systems or stealing info and money or delivering viruses or holding businesses hostage with ransomware. And yeah, that is and was a part of what hacking is. But what the movie Hackers accurately shows about hacking as a culture is that there is very much community. And as much as hacking was a means of using telephonic technologies to access computer networks, it was and remains a lifestyle. And it's a lifestyle of curiosity and poking and prodding things to find their weak spots. Yeah, it's for the immediate gratification of the self, right? Finding ways to make free phone calls in the 90s, or how to fish soda machines for free drinks, or how to skim data to gain others' personal information, or how to program cards to get free satellite channels. But it's just as much about sharing and of calling out power brokers that would rather remain hidden, or exposing harmful secrets, of testing security systems to point out their flaws and make them stronger, and of exploring, of finding information, of being curious. And in those regards, the film really got it right. And I guess that makes sense because the film's writer, Raphael Moreau, immersed himself in hacker and cyberpunk culture, not just to acquire the jargon, which gets really, really colorfully thrown around at some very strange moments in the film. They use words that they obviously have no idea what they mean in context. And by they, I mean the actors. Like, they talk about RISC and CISC CPU architectures and BODs as term of measurements of modems. It's really funny because it's ridiculous, but it's there. But he was also really trying, the writer, Raphael Moreau, was really trying to learn what this was all about. And he observed how so many in the community were being actively pursued and harassed by law enforcement and government entities, which translates into the script. He even named the film's MacGuffin, the hack target, the Gibson supercomputer, after the writer William Gibson, who wrote the speculative fiction novel Neuromancer, which would serve as a sort of seminal inspiration for that other 90s hacking movie I mentioned a few minutes ago, The Matrix. So as I think back, almost 30 years later, these people, Acid Burn, Zero Cool, Serial Killer, and Lord Nikon, despite their silly net handles, they're still relevant. These characters still have a place in our lives, I think. I think the story still makes sense. It's really about seeking community and knowing that there are things that are being kept from us that shouldn't be. That information is not a tool or a prize to keep locked up or to goad or to reward. Like, these are things that should be available. And that's what this movie is about. It's about kids starting to understand the limitations that are going to be placed on them as adults and really pushing back against that. And I think that we all can still heed their call to hack the planet. And that's it for this episode. Thanks for sharing your time with me. If you have comments, questions, or suggestions for future topics, please leave a comment on social media. Send an email to finlos@finloslives.com or leave a voice message via the SpeakPipe app at finloslives.com. I look forward to our next conversation.